Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jerry Green from the Pacific Council on International Policy. I am delighted to welcome you to a conversation with Professor Amy Wilentz, who has become a regular visitor to these talks and is a member of the Pacific Council, which of course gives me great joy. Professor Wilentz teaches literary journalism at the University of California at Irvine. This will sound snarky, but I didn't know there was any other type of journalism besides literary journalism, but that's another conversation for another day, and people would hate me, but as you can tell, I have a real bias for the written word, and Amy is particularly skilled at that. Amy has an interesting skill set because she's an expert both on Israel and was the correspondent for the New Yorker in Israel, and on Haiti. Those are two countries that, unless you're being alphabetical, I follow as H, one doesn't often lump together. But she's the author of a book called Farewell, Fred Voodoo, a letter from Haiti. She has another book called The Rainy Season, Haiti Since Duvalier. And given recent events in Haiti, I have seen op-eds by her and a variety of very prominent publications. Rather than spending precious time on her very impressive bio, let me direct you to Professor Wilentz's website, which is Amy, A-M-I, Wilentz, W-I-L.
A-M-Y.
A-M-Y. I have, why did I say that? It says Y. I wrote it right and said it wrong. AMYWILENTZ.com, which is really very, very interesting. So, Amy, I want to welcome you back. Let me ask, maybe this is too much of a political science-y professor question, which is my day job. Is what happened in Haiti a coup or an assassination?
It's really an interesting question. In my opinion, it's an assassination, not a coup. Because a coup implies not just a changing of the head of government, but the changing of the political makeup of the government. Under Moise, that's the late President Jovenel Moise, there was barely any government besides Moise. So you could argue that killing the head of government was to change government. But in fact, the new prime minister select, who is just governing provisionally and temporarily, we assume, to fill in the power gap, while a new election is somehow made to function in the country. His new government, his cabinet, is all people, basically Moise supporters, Moise people. It's not a new government in any way. It's not new in a good way. It's not new in a bad way. It's the same government, essentially, with a new prime minister.
And what would the objective be of assassinate? It almost sounds personal. In other words, they wanted to get rid of the head of state. And I know it's hard to say because we don't know, but is there what could their objective? Obviously, their objective is to kill him, and they succeeded. But what was their objective in killing him? And what can we expect next? I know it's a hard question to ask, but
no, but I mean, there's a lot of speculation because there's very little fact to go on as of yet, and that's 3 weeks after the assassination of a sitting president. But if you think about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, you will recall, perhaps, Jerry, that there was a large investigation. There was someone arrested. He was killed in the prison by a mobster prisoner. And it was very Haitian, let's put it that way. And it took a really long time and a very, very long report to put rumors to rest, which still aren't at rest right now. So I just want to remind our listeners, who will be primarily Americans, that you can say Haiti is dysfunctional and weird, but on the other hand, so are most countries in the midst of an assassination. So that said, in defense of the small first Black republic ever in the history of the globe, I will say there's a lot of confusion and a lot of speculation about what would be the motives for killing the guy. First of all, his 5-year term or 6-year term, according to him, was coming to an end within 6 months. Why kill him, right? He's going to be out of there anyway. So you don't need to go to that expense and extreme to get rid of him. He's going. So you said personal, and there, it feels like there's an element of the personal in this, not probably that, you know, an angry lover of his wife or a disgruntled mistress or the way you would think of a normal business partner who's angry. But maybe he was going to tell some truth about someone. Maybe he was going to expose some corruption about a former associate. I mean, this was not a clean president, and this was not a good president, and this was not a statesman. You know, I'm very sad that he was killed. And I'm not just crying crocodile tears. I really am sad. And I think it's very unfortunate for Haiti to have a sitting president assassinated, not only in his private residence, but in his private bedroom. I think it's horrible and an embarrassment, and sad for his family, of course. But he was no good for Haiti. And many, many people hated him. I asked a friend of mine who's very plugged in Haiti, a Haitian friend, what did he think? And he said, well, he's made a lot of people mad. He's killed a lot of people. And beyond that, he's been driving everybody up a wall for years now. So, you know, there's all this bad feeling around the person. Yet something like this is hard to do. And so you have to think it's more than just his personhood, but that there's money at play and power at play. And while not a coup per se, it's the need to get rid of a president who has a certain knowledge. And to have a president there, I was writing recently that it's the presidency that was at stake. The presidency is so important. Moise made it more important because he gathered all power to the presidency and got rid of the legislature through attrition, but he never called new elections. He was firing judges from the Supreme Court. It was kind of a Trumpian atmosphere down there. And so he was basically the capo di tutti capo. And if you got rid of him, then you could have the presidency or the powers of the presidency. So I think the presidency is the big prize right now. And so it doesn't look like a coup, and it's not actually a coup. It's a business power grab. That's what I think it is. Sorry to be so long-winded.
No. This actually
literally journalistic.
No. It's actually very, very helpful because people, myself included, we talk a lot about Haiti, you know, only when something, you know, atypically, rather than the normal day-to-day terrible, sort of uber terrible, and then it's forgotten. And
right.
You know,
so the knowledge, and this is understandable. It's theoretically, it's a small and important country. It's actually not, world historically speaking, but it feels that way to Americans, a little place that sends us some immigrants. But so what happens is there's a very sporadic knowledge. And when you have sporadic knowledge of a distant foreign place, it's often only of the bad things that happen. So you only know, like, this terrible thing happened, they're not dealing with it. This other terrible thing happened, they're not dealing with it. And you begin to have this kind of, it's called Haiti fatigue, because like it's always a bad story. But what was interesting to me was, so right before, literally right before this assassination happened, I had written a piece for The Nation called "Everyone's Ignoring Haiti." Terrible things were happening under this guy. And I said the international media, the international media, the US government, the foreign press, everyone was ignoring Haiti. And literally 6 hours later, the president was assassinated. So I had this piece out in The Nation that said, everyone's ignoring Haiti. Meanwhile, everyone was trying to find out about Haiti. So it was a very weird coincidence for me.
Let me ask you a question, though. Why, and I don't, this probably will sound worse than my intention. Why should people not ignore Haiti? In other words, which will eventually lead to my question on U.S. policy and, Biden and so forth. But I read, that Haiti is sort of at the basket case of the Western Hemisphere in terms of its economy and political development and so forth. I don't know if that's true, but that's what's often written. What do us civilians, I call myself a casual observer, but that means that I'm observer and I'm not even observing. What is it that people need to know about Haiti that they're not seeing? I think that's perhaps the best way to ask the question.
Well, so normally we're not interested in foreign countries. Okay, we're Americans. We have two giant oceans on either side of us. We've been historically America firsters and America onlyers, and we just don't think about them very much unless they're really important. So we think about Russia and China. We briefly thought about Japan when it seemed very, very, very successful. Now we don't think about Japan. Try to remember the last story you read about Japan. It was like multiple suicides somewhere, or a grisly murder of female nurses or something like that. You don't read about Japan anymore because it's not important to the American economy. So Haiti is not important to the Americans now. But there have been times, first of all, as I said, it's a world historical country. It's one of the three great Atlantic revolutions: the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and finally the Haitian Revolution. It began in 1791, ended in 1804. It ended with the formerly enslaved people ousting Napoleon and his French Empire. That was a big deal. It was a big deal then. It's a big deal just like the French Revolution is today, and the American Revolution. And beyond that, what it meant for the United States is very important. It would both freak the United States out because here was a former slave economy, like our slave economy, that had been overthrown by its enslaved people. Right? So that didn't set a good example as far as the United States was concerned. And then secondly, it caused Napoleon to leave the New World. When Napoleon left the New World, he left Louisiana behind. He sold it to Thomas Jefferson. He created, essentially the Haitian enslaved peoples, created the continental United States. So think of it that way. If they hadn't defeated Napoleon, he would have gone to war for Louisiana. Who wouldn't go to war for Louisiana? Jazz, etc. No, but really, so that's something to remember historically. Then also a little bit more history just to drive people crazy. In 1915, the last time a Haitian president was assassinated, the United States invaded Haiti, occupied Haiti, and stayed there for almost is it 30 years or 20 years? I think it's almost 20 years, 19 years. And, they did a lot of work with Haiti, but a lot of them were Marines, and many were Southerners with a very serious racial attitude. And it caused a lot of problems in Haiti. But the reason the Americans did that was because, first of all, there were banking interests in Haiti. The National City Bank, which became Citibank, was sort of a ruling force in Haiti, and it ran money through Haiti. It had accounts through Haiti. It helped Haitians pay money to France that they owed for the revolution. I mean, it was incredibly powerful there. Plus, there were all sorts of American businesses there, as there were in many, many places around what used to be called the Third World. And there were sugar growers, American sugar growers, very powerful. We needed to keep Haiti safe. And therefore, we needed to keep Haiti stable. And that has been our overarching policy in Haiti since then. Haiti is like a weird, unprotected protectorate of the United States. And that's one reason why the Haitians are always so angry at the Americans. And yet there is such a tense and sort of torrid relationship between the United States and Haiti.
As a francophonic country, does it enjoy some special relationship with France? I mean, Guadeloupe and Martinique are they're part of France. They're France Outre-mer, overseas. They're like Hawaii to us. Haiti is francophonic. I know that when one of the Duvaliers fled, I guess it was the son, Baby Doc, he fled to France and lived this grand lifestyle. Does France do anything to help Haiti is, what's the nature of the relationship?
First of all, the thing that makes Haiti different from Guadeloupe and Martinique, other than having been a much more productive and much more successful slave colony, is the revolution. So that revolution did not really extend to Guadeloupe and Martinique. Hence, they are part of France now, and Haiti is a kind of pariah. And what France did to Haiti was in the 1820s, I believe, they levied a demand for reparations on Haiti. So they were defeated by the Haitians. This doesn't happen. They were defeated by them, and then they demanded basically taxes from them to pay back for what they had stolen from France during the revolution, the plantations, and the people on the plantation. So the Haitians effectively stole themselves from the French and then were forced by France to pay France back for themselves, for their very bodies and minds. And they continued paying that, which was in the billions of dollars, today's dollars. I think it's $21 billion from the 20s of the 1800s to the 40s of the 1900s. 1948, the debt was repaid. So effectively, France, while it took the two francophone islands that are outre-mer, part of France, they're departments of France like Provence or Lot or whatever, and they raised them up, and they took Haiti and squashed it down. And no, Haiti's not part of France, but Haiti cares about France, and the elite of Haiti, they really have cared about France over the years and have moved to Paris. There are many, many Haitians in Paris. So the Haitian diaspora is Brooklyn, Montreal, Paris, Tunisia a little bit in the old days in the 60s, places like that, and of course Miami.
And again, it's what we read is that this assassination was quite likely planned by people in South Florida, and they apparently hired Colombian mercenaries. But if you compare this to Bay of Pigs, that was politically motivated. That was the CIA. I mean, this sounds, I don't know if I should use the word criminal, but it sounds, as based on your description, as something personal rather than purely political. Are there well-known and political, Haitian emigre political or movements in the United States?
There aren't any longer those kinds of movements. This doctor who the government has sort of lazily tried to pin this crime on, he's like a throwback to people who used to try to overthrow Duvalier. So when people were trying to overthrow Castro in Cuba with the help of the CIA, in Haiti, they were trying to do the same thing, I think not with the help of the CIA, although in conversation with the US, and they failed and were executed. So there is that history of the diasporan refugees trying to come back in and fix things politically by staging a coup d'etat, but it hasn't happened. And I don't believe that story for 1 second that you just recounted. That is the story that the people, in my opinion, whoever did the assassination, that's the story they want you to believe. It's the cover story. Some crazy guy in Florida with a lot of money, who doesn't have a lot of money, hired the Colombians, which it's not clear what the relationship was or how he hired them. And they did it, which it's not clear that they did it, frankly. There are many stories blowing about in Haiti that they weren't even there at the time he was killed. He was killed at 1:30. They arrived at 2:15. They helped the wife and the kids. His body has been already taken. I don't know, but there are a lot of conflicting stories to go with this. So I wouldn't accept anything so far that the government has said. I think it may have arrested some of the people who actually were involved. I don't know that the Colombians were really involved, because I find it strange, although not unexpected, that the Haitian government has so far not allowed the Colombian ambassador in to see his compatriots in detention there in Haiti. He's not been allowed in. No one has been allowed in. They have not been given doctors. They have not been given lawyers. they have not been allowed to speak. Now, I have to assume that the reason for that is once they speak, the Haitian government doesn't want to hear what they have to say.
And I've heard that the FBI is involved in the investigation. Is that true, or perhaps in a restricted way, or
They're there. Now,
there?
what they'll end up
Huh.
getting to do or being allowed to do. A friend of mine just wrote to me last night. He was telling me a lot of things I already knew, and I was saying, well, I know that. Well, I know that because he's my fixer. So he's supposed to tell me things I don't know. So at the end, he said, we were talking about how the Colombians haven't seen anyone. And he said, Haiti doesn't really care what the foreign community thinks. Everybody goes around saying, oh, the United States is going to be so mad, oh, blah, blah. But they don't care. That's what he said. I don't know if that's true or if everything they do is okayed first with the Americans or the foreign community. It's called the international community or the core group. In the core group of Haiti's friends, and Israel has this too, and the Palestinians have this too, a group of friends. The Haiti's friends are the US, the Canadians, the French, the Dominican Republic, the OAS, the UN, and then an assortment of other nations and institutions who help Haiti decide what it's going to do, essentially, and who supervise elections, which I'm not going to go there unless you ask me about how Moise ever got elected.
I was not going to ask that.
Okay.
If you have sort of bent elections, forever, you eventually get that right. In other words, you get very good at
learn
that.
how to do the bent election. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Tammany Hall or something.
Right.
What I would like.
Tammany Hall. It is like Tammany Hall.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you, much of the op-edery I've been reading sort of says that the United States should not help Haiti, that, the reason Haiti is in the terrible straits it's in is because of help by the US. And I find, again, I don't have, enough expertise to judge that. But as a broader question, what should US policy to Haiti be? What should the United States do to be a good neighbor, if nothing else, and help a country that's not all that far from the United States? I mean, I think there is a geographic responsibility to do something, but I'm not sure what it is.
I'll say two things about that. One is, people for years have asked me, why is Haiti like that? And then they go, I mean, it's so close to the US. Why is it like that? So the implication being, it's so bad and so near the US. Why is it like that? And for years I thought, yeah, it's so near the US. Why is it like that? And then I realized it's because it's so near the US that it's like that, because of our bad influence. So I cannot begin to look at this question from the innocent eyes of an American who believes in the goodness of her country, because I've lived and worked in Haiti too long to ever believe that again. I'll never believe it. No one can convince me. So that's who I am. Sorry, everyone. I wish I did believe it. But that said, I want to believe that. And I think that, there is an impulse toward the good in the United States among the people and with this government now. Under Trump, he just said that Haiti was a country of a kind, that I won't use the term because you can't use it on FAA run stations. So I'm just going to consider the Pacific Council of that kind of good behavior, puritanical behavior. And I won't say what the term was that he used for poor countries, but you'll remember it. And he loved Moise. Oh my God, he supported Moise right down the line because he was a strong man. And Biden continued that, because Biden, frankly, in my opinion, he did not want to deal with Haiti. Like, just let it go. I don't care what happens as long as it doesn't do something bad and explode. So it exploded, not because of Biden, but because it did. And then he had to deal with it. But what I think America should do, if it were a good neighbor, and if it had its same agenda there, which is stability and something that looks a lot like democracy, which it hasn't done, and in a long time. And so if it wants something democratic-ish and something stable and something maybe good, then it should talk to new partners in Haiti. it has to have new partners in Haiti. The partners it has had have given you Moise and Moise's predecessor, have given a lot of trouble to the somewhat democratically elected previous presidents. And they're just a problem. And we can't keep doing business with these people. And these are the businessmen of Haiti and the top elite of Haiti. They need to talk more to progressive people, real Democrats who have in mind the good of the Haitian people, which is what's necessary to stop Haitians from fleeing Haiti because they can't even eat. A Haitian family lives on $800 a year. I rest my case. They need a new government.
And who are the good partner? In other words, the potential partners. Who should the U.S. be talking to?
Well, there are a lot of different ones. One that I'm particularly fond of because I know some of the people involved is called the Commission to Find a Haitian Solution to the Crisis. Okay, it's a little bit weighty as a title, but that's what they're doing. And what they've done, and it's not easy, of course, and that's one reason the US doesn't do it. Not because it's not easy, it's dangerous. Things can blow up, people fight. They've tried to bring in the millions who live in the countryside, farmers, fruit growers, herders. So that's about 1 million people and in different groups. And there are peasant groups. They're called peasants still in Haiti for French reasons. And then there are the people who live in the shanty towns, and they have groups that are organized that care about this. There are student groups, there are labor groups, unions. I mean, there's a lot going on in Haiti that the United States basically ignores as these people serve as cannon fire for tough guys like Moise and the gangs that were run during his administration and are still functioning in the streets, which we haven't even talked about.
Cynic that I am, I don't imagine this happening, but it would be in the interest of the United States to actually do this properly rather than having to deal with problems as they arise, with fits and starts. And Biden almost seems to think about Haiti in the same way that he thinks about Iraq and Afghanistan. His immediate response is, we're not going to send troops, we're not going to get involved, and so forth. And there's some sympathy for this America First notion. He doesn't use the term, but it certainly feels like that in terms of Afghanistan, Iraq, and probably Haiti. One wonders if there's enough of a motivation, and again, this is Jerry the cynic, to get Washington to think about it differently in the way that you just described, which makes very good sense to me. And, Samantha Power, is the new head of AID. She, when she was not in government, showed great sympathy to these types of issues. How does one get the U.S. government to do the smart thing, which could be the right thing, which probably is a lot cheaper than doing the wrong thing, and over the long term might prove more workable?
Well, one problem is a previous example, and I'll just try to do this short. So under President Bush Sr., or as we call him in Haiti, Papa Bush, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the first freely and fairly and democratically elected president of Haiti, certified by Jimmy Carter, was ousted in a coup d'etat. And this same business class who probably murdered Moise came into power. With the army, the Haitians had an army at the time. Then Clinton came to power in the US. Aristide's living in Washington and making a pest of himself. And finally, Clinton goes like, yeah, the guy was freely and fairly elected. Let's put him back in. These other guys are criminals and generals, and they're making a mess of it and killing people randomly. Yeah, let's put Aristide back in. He puts Aristide back in. Then Clinton goes out of office. Baby Bush comes into office, and they kick Aristide out again. So this is the kind of thing that is causing problems. This way of thinking is causing problems. And also, Clinton put Aristide back in, and the business class made a big ruckus and a big, sort of gossip kind of news atmosphere for Aristide that made him look very, very scary and dangerous, which I'm sure he was a little scary and dangerous, no doubt, at certain times. But still, he was a legitimate president. But I think people saw what happened to Clinton with Haiti. It was a problem. And it grew into such a big problem under baby Bush that the guy was kicked out again. So I think Biden's thinking like, because he was around for when Aristide got put in power. He was involved in that. He knew about it. He famously in Haiti said on the Charlie Rose show, he said, this is a god awful thing to say, the way Biden talks. It's a god awful thing to say. But I mean, if Haiti sank 300 feet under the water or rose up 300 feet above the water, no one would care. So the Haitians have that on tape. They all look at it. I think there's the fear that you pick up the grenade to stop it from killing people, and you're the one who goes. And that's what Haiti is. And that's why they're so reluctant to do the right thing, because the right thing, as I said, it's a little like herding cats. You got all the peasants, you got all the students, everybody has their own need. Whereas with the people they have been consorting with, the US has been consorting with, you got one basically goal in mind that you can understand. And that is, these people want to make money. And we know what that's about. And they can do business with us. They speak English. They have nice houses. They invite us to dinner. That's good. We can't deal with the people in the shanty towns. I mean, I think that's the basic feeling in Washington. It's too hard.
I'm just curious. It's one of the sort of interesting things about history and geography is the Dominican Republic and Haiti share the same island, but they're such very different countries. And I'd be curious if you could sort of compare the two. I mean, I'm no more expert in the Dominican Republic, although I know they have these training facilities for baseball players, which I'd love to visit, but I've never been to either one. And I'm just curious that, how is there a good relationship between the Dominican Republic and Haiti? Is the border open, and is there a lot of movement back and forth? Because if I didn't know this, I would not believe they shared the same island. It just doesn't sound, they sound like such different places.
I think you've hit on one thing major in this conversation, although it's true they're very different. They are different. They sound like such different places. They're not that different. But now they're very different. Now Haiti's a catastrophe. Right now, Haiti's a catastrophe. There's terrible violence in the streets. People are poorer than they've been. The government's in a shambles, but I attribute it to the long policy of the US. It's kind of like long COVID. It's the long policy. And I think you have to look at history to say why. You cannot simply go like, hey, they're different, they share a border, why are they different? Because that, I know from the past, I know that's not happening in this conversation, is a very racialized conversation that you're having. Like, why are the Haitians so bad and the Dominicans so good? But if you look at it racially from the point of view, the racist point of view of the old United States, yeah, there's been very different treatment of the two places. And also, we've kind of loved on the strongmen of the Dominican Republic, because Cuba. And we also love the dictators of Haiti for the same reason, but they weren't as long bad as the Dominican dictators. Also, the sugar industry is just gigantic in the Dominican Republic, bigger even than Haiti's was. And to build the Dominican Republic can attribute part of its success to the failure of Haiti, because Haiti is so poor that what's happened is the Dominican workforce at the lowest level of hard labor, like on the sugar plantations, cutting cane, which I have done, you can't do it. It's impossible unless you're really, really strong and desperate. All their workers were Haitian agricultural workers, until one day they decided they didn't want them anymore. And there was a huge massacre, I think it was in the 1930s, of Haitians. Like 10,000 people were killed in this attack by the Dominican army on the Haitian population. They're not allowed judicial standing. They're not allowed citizenship in the Dominican Republic. Even if your baby is born there, he can't be Dominican, she can't be Dominican. So there's long-standing rivalry. And then the Haitians ran the Dominican Republic for a while in the 1800s. And that's still resented because the Dominicans have a racial feeling about Haiti that the Black man should never be their superior. And they also don't want now Haiti's failure to rub off on them. So there's a double feeling of scorn on the part of the Dominican Republic for Haitians in Haiti. So I think the border is closed right now. It opens and closes. A lot of graft at the border too.
What's the situation? I always ask you this question in a different way, so forgive me for being such a groupie, but what's the situation of journalists in Haiti? Is there a free press, or it sounds to me like, the press would be very restricted, both by the government and by the oligarchs, or whatever they call, is there a free press?
Yes, there is a free press, and under President Preval and under Aristide for the most part. So Preval was after Aristide. Preval was like Mr. Free Speech. You can say whatever you want. Haiti's a party where everybody's shouting. And that's how Haitians like to be. They like to be very free in their speech. And under Duvalier, they couldn't be, of course. So that was a time where everyone could speak, but no one could get much done. So it was great. You could talk, but what was happening? Now it's much more clamped down, but it's not so much. It's not like the Russians or the Soviet Union, where when they clamp down, they shoot you in the elevator, they go to your house, they put polonium in your teacup. It's not like that. It's like drive-by shootings. Oh, and the victim happens to be a journalist. That's why I wrote the piece that I wrote right before Moise was killed, because a journalist who was working on a dossier about the presidency and Moise's people was assassinated like a week before Moise was assassinated on the street. It could have been a drive-by shooting. He was assassinated with a sort of very outspoken, almost militant opposition figure. So the two of them were together. It was evening, and they were killed in the street by gangs driving by. And he's not the only journalist who's been killed.
My final question, which is, impossible to answer, but actually, maybe it's not impossible. What's your prediction about what's going to happen in Haiti, both domestically and Washington? Is this going to be some sort of wake-up call for Washington, or is this just going to be a way for Washington to be sort of more artful and being inattentive to what happens in Haiti?
You're probably, that last guess is right, but I think Samantha Powers is a good figure. AID has been huge in Haiti. She could decide that, it's kind of interesting. She's an intellectual. She might be thinking about it now. She knows people who've been very involved in Haiti. I think there's a chance that she might get some good advice. But what I say, one of the basic lessons I've learned in Haiti is figure out what you think will happen in the future when someone asks you this kind of question, then say the opposite. Because that's the way it seemed to be. I can't say what will happen. I think the elections will have to be put off for a while longer, or no one will vote in them because the streets are too dangerous. And they're supposedly predicted for the 26th of September. Well, that's in a month and a half. I just don't see that happening. I think what will happen is that this prime minister, who was appointed by Moise the day before he was killed and had not yet taken office and was basically given the office by the US, I think he'll be, probably with any luck, a transition to many other transitions that will possibly be peaceful. I'm giving you the cheery-eyed view, and lead to a real election where the people vote for a candidate they want.
One final, that was my pen final question. This is my real final question. How did you get interested in Haiti? I mean, interested to the point of writing, 2 books about it. Clearly, having Haitian friends, but Israel I can get. That's sort of, it's small, but it's sort of, of global interest. I don't know many people that have your level of expertise. I don't think I know any people that have your level of expertise and interest in Haiti. And I'm curious, how did it feature so prominently in your own intellectual and journalistic journey?
Well, first of all, there are a bunch of us who are not from Haiti who are as painfully and lovingly devoted to the country, because it's a very special, fabulous, incredible, historical place. It's just amazing. But the way I got involved was I learned French in school from the time I was 11 years old. So I knew French. And then there were all these Haitians in my neighborhood in New York who had fled Duvalier, and they would gather on corners and chat at each other. And I listened and I learned Creole. And then once I knew a little Creole, I thought I better go down there. It was the end of the Duvalier regime. And I got down there, and Jean-Claude Duvalier, Baby Doc, left Haiti while I was there. That's kind of thing that you never forget. It's very influential. People who were in the Soviet Union when the wall fell, this was gigantic for them. They never changed. But no one ever asked them, why are you interested in Russia? Because it's obvious why you're interested in Russia, right? Huge player on the international scene. Why you're interested in Haiti? Well, you're kind of a historiographer, anthropologist, lover of humanity and art. You know, that's me. And it answers all my needs and keeps teaching me lessons still. So I've spent an entire career, not just 2 books, on this place.
I can't think of a better note on which to end, which is shame on us for being inattentive and not being more interested and not knowing more. Yet again, we are in your debt. And again, I just want to end by mentioning Professor Wilentz's website, amywilentzz.com. And you'll learn a lot about, and we should all start reading your books. I hope you've seen this huge uptick in your Haiti writings.
It's been a little interest.
Well, let's hope not. Amy, thank you so much for being such a good Pacific Council member and a good citizen. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jerry.
Take care.